Good afternoon, Mary Robinson. A great pleasure to speak to you again. I wanted to ask you, ahead of the G7, the backdrop, of course, to this is a year of a pandemic. In order to get anywhere on climate change, is it essential that first a deal is reached on getting access for poorer nations to vaccines?
It absolutely is, and I think this is underappreciated. I feel very strongly that there are three things that the G7 must do in particular, and the elders have said this, both in my letters on behalf of the elders to each of the G7 leaders personally, and our statement the other day. We are saying we need to increase the equitable access to vaccines, for the Gavi COVAX promise about that, 1 million doses by 1st of September 2021, the 500 million, a billion doses, sorry, the 500 million that Biden has now said the US has bought from Pfizer is very good. That's a real step in the right direction. Also, the WHO, WTO transfer of the technology and licensing to developing countries, or else a change in the TRIPS intellectual property agreement, which Biden has also accepted may be necessary. And then the third thing, and the very important thing for your question, is the climate finance. If the voices are not able to be there because of the lack of access to vaccines, we will not have the urgency we need to have a good COP in Glasgow. That's the bottom line.
The other backdrop to this, of course, is also the UK government's proposals to cut foreign aid spending as a percentage of national income. Should that be reversed?
I think it's very sad that the United Kingdom lost an essential leadership, which I had praised with my Irish accent over and over, to put into legislation 0.7% was real leadership. And frankly, it's never been needed more. This is the wrong time and the wrong way, especially when you have presidency of the COP. We need to build trust with developing countries. The $100 billion a year of climate finance, half of it going to adaptation, has been long promised, and we still haven't got there. And meanwhile, developing countries are seeing the huge solidarity packages that the richer parts of the world, understandably want for their citizens and are able to do for their citizens. But, the contrast between not able to reach the 100 billion, it's becoming an angry point. And when, the presidency of COP has decided in this year of all years to reduce what was leadership, and that means cutting budgets in Yemen, cutting budgets in Sudan, cutting budgets in Syria. It's shocking. It's cutting budgets for education at a time when girls have to drop out of school. Another area where the UK had been leading on girls' education. This is not the way you build trust. And actually, the presidency of the COP, and I know this from Paris when I was the special envoy of the Secretary General, the presidency of the COP has to have the trust of developing countries if we're going to have a successful COP. That's just the absolutely prerequisite.
And you rightfully mentioned the 100 billion a year, which was pledged as long ago as 2009. It hasn't yet materialised. Is it enough?
It's not enough, but it's a trust issue. What actually is needed is trillions more in private sector money, and part of that 100 billion takes the risk out. And there is talk now of a possible G7 focus on more real clean energy for developing countries to take the risk out. That is really important. I know of both infrastructure projects and nature-based projects in developing countries that they would like to put forward, and they can't get the financing for them because of the risks, so-called, involved. If that can be de-risked, that would be hugely important.
The International Energy Agency is calling for an immediate stop to any new oil, gas or coal development. At the same time, there's some 400 new coal mines planned. Is this a realistic goal, and how do we achieve it?
I really welcomed the most recent report of the International Energy Agency, for the first time aligning with the goal that we have to implement of staying well, at or below 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial standards. And that meant, as Fatih Birol rightly said, come on, guys, we got to go there. We got to get out of fossil fuel and as quickly as possible. This is where the real action is. I'm glad that business leaders are stepping up as much as they are. I'm glad that courts are taking actions against Shell, for example, and that shareholders are taking action against Exxon in shareholder meetings. All of this is contributing, and investors in particular, have issued a recent statement. They will not invest if you go the fossil fuel route. But look at what the G7 countries are doing coming out of recovery. Only 22% of the investment so far coming out of COVID is for clean energy. Only 22%. That's not tolerable.
What you're touching on there is that it needs to go deeper, doesn't it, than a sort of cheerful communique at the end of the G7. There needs to be a lot of detail. What detail specifically would you like to see?
I want to see the G7 commit to every country this year in Glasgow having a nationally determined contribution, which is real, worked out, measurable, and about being aligned to the 1.5 degrees. So yes, it's good to have the long-term goal of being zero carbon and zero emissions by 2050, but we're more interested in what's going to happen in 2025, 2024, 2026, measurable, just as the vaccines has to be measurable, which is why the elders really support the Gavi, COVAX commitment that was made for $1 billion by the 1st of September and $2 billion by mid-2022. Not saying in a global way, we will vaccinate the whole world. That's kind of rhetoric. We need precision. We need measurement. We need real commitment. The more the G7 can recognize their utter responsibility. We have had a year, 2 years really, of devastation around the world. And of course, it's worse for developing countries. And it's worse for the Sustainable Development Goals progress in developing countries. It's worse for girls out of school who are driven into early child marriage. It's worse for the unemployed youth who think there's now no hope at all. This has to change. The responsibility is huge. And it's a G7 actual responsibility leading to a G20 in July of changing the dynamic in a measurable way, so we're on course for a safe and more equitable world.
Mary Robinson, it's been a pleasure talking to you on Sky News. Thank you.